All right, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. It's on how to pick the right drones for mapping and surveying. I'm Kerry Garrison, the Vice President of Multi-Copter Warehouse, as well as I head the Enterprise Sales team. With me is Aaron Woods, our latest addition to the team. He has extensive experience with Pix4D, and hopefully we're going to help you guys to make some good decisions when it comes to what type of products you should be using to get the most out of mapping. If you haven't done a lot of mapping, we'll just kind of do a brief kind of overview by what we mean by mapping. And there's a lot of different uses, from surveying and 3D modeling to structural inspections, job site monitoring, things like called cut fill reports or volumetric measurements on stockpiles. There's quite a different amount of applications out there for mapping. It can save time, improve safety, and acquire data that people have never had access to before. Aaron, what type of things have you seen are kind of the most popular in terms of uses out there?
That's a great question. Really, the options and the uses for this type of technology continue to grow by the day. There are a lot of folks now starting to use multi-rotor UAVs to capture data for, of course, the construction. Also very popular with law enforcement for accident or scene reconstruction. Insurance industries have really started picking this up as well to help document what has happened after natural disasters and other sort of emergency situations. And then any type of facility that has a large amount of assets or resources that need to be monitored on a regular basis, whether it be a large corporate facility or a university, any place that has a lot of assets they're trying to keep track of, really modeling and mapping with UAVs is the most affordable, efficient way to capture and keep that data up to date for the end users.
Actually, one of my first conversations I ever had about 3D mapping was when I was in Kauai, and they were using mapping to map how different invasive species were moving into the island and what their mitigation efforts were doing. So they were going up and flying like every week to get that data, create the maps, and then be able to create a timeline of how those different species are moving about on the island. And we're talking about plants, not animals.
Yeah, and the areas of multispectral sort of analysis are looking at things outside of the human visible RGB spectrum. The data you can capture from a multispectral camera, such as the one offered by DJI, the DJI P4P RTK model, or I'm sorry, the multispec RTK, really provides a wealth of information beyond what you can really see with your human eye, and it helps you tease out that information about vegetation health and also then in areas that may be impacted by by insect infestation and things like that. And also now with thermal cameras, you can do a lot of great information detection for thermal anomalies on rooftops, for very large facilities for inspections, or even on golf courses looking for irrigation issues, because anytime you have water running out on the ground inadvertently, you're just wasting money.
Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I ever put an XT camera up in the air. I did it over the largest Walmart in the area, and you could instantly see that there were two HVAC units that were running significantly hotter than the others. And so for even something like that, which I had never thought of before, I was thinking maybe I'll see some anomalies in the roof with different temperature variations due to the skylights, due to insulation differences. But what really stood out was the HVACs running really hot compared to the others. I don't know if they were overheating because I didn't know what the spec was, but that would have been data that I could have given to an HVAC company and said, well, here's the temperature that these are running, and here's the temperature these two are running, and they could make a determination whether they need to go out and do preventive maintenance versus waiting for it to fail.
Big cost savings being able to do that preventive maintenance and identifying the problems before they really become a problem. Good point.
So some of the different industries that we see are going to be your surveying and mapping, construction companies, agriculture, inspection. Mining and aggregates is really big, having to measure stockpiles. There's really no better or more accurate way of measuring stockpiles than with aerial. We talked to a mine down in Victor, and they used to get kids from high school to walk around with the little wheels on sticks to go around it and then have to go up and over the top of the stockpile, which definitely not safe sometimes. And so that's why they had kids do it, I guess. But once they had a drone, they were able to do it 10 times faster with more accuracy. Public safety, you already mentioned that, accident reconstruction. When I've talked to the sheriff's departments who are responsible for clearing an accident scene, it was typically taking them about 2 hours to get traffic moving again, because they would have to block off the streets. They'd have to get out their measuring wheels and their tapes and get everything measured and documented before they could open the street back up. And now they go out, they just fly it, create a quick map, clear the scene, and then do all those measurements after the fact.
Definitely. So, in an area we haven't talked about is, we'll say, Hollywood or multimedia. I've worked with a number of different studios who are starting to use this mapping technology to size up or to get information about their shooting locations ahead of time. They can do that much more cheaply than sending out a whole pre-production crew, just sending out a UAV pilot, mapping the scene, and they can experience substantial cost savings when it comes time to shoot on set by having good information on what is there.
I never thought about that before. So it's like shooting the set, in essence, or an on-location scene to see where they might need to put different lights or whatever.
Or even where you want the actors to stand so that they're not in the scene but don't have to be walked way far off before they can be there for their next scene. You just really cut down on cost waste during production. You can have fewer people on set, fewer materials brought in, and just have a more successful production.
Wow, I'd never heard of that one before. That's fascinating. So we've talked about some applications, we've talked about the industries, and here's just kind of another list that I have done about the different uses, and I think we've talked about a lot of these. Construction planning, being able to do cut fill analysis, meaning how much material needs to be taken off of a site or brought into a site to bring it up to grade. Volume measurements, emergency management, we've talked about that. Accident documentation, land management, I talked about that about Hawaii. Job bidding, your progress documentation, being able to fly it over and over again and create a timeline so you can see how that job has progressed over time. Damage assessment, solar panels, that's a big, huge, yes. And with thermal cameras, being able to do a large solar panel farm, which from the ground, driving back and forth could take a couple weeks actually to map out a whole area. They can do it in a day. So huge, huge cost savings and time savings, and being able to deliver that data extremely quickly.
Yes, exactly. That is a huge cost savings, and you want to make sure your solar panels are operating at optimal efficiency and you're getting your return on investment there.
So you can see on this image that this is a 2D view of our office building here, and I've just put some measurement lines in there so you can see some of the things that you can very easily do with a 2D map. With a 3D where I can actually see the height of it, I can do another measurement and actually create a volumetric measurement of that building. So pretty cool stuff. So this webinar wasn't really talking about an intro to mapping, but I wanted to cover the basics for those people who wanted to know more, I guess. And this was really about choosing the right drone, and we want to talk about the different common drones that are available, pros and cons, and what you can kind of expect out of those. And as you know, there's a lot of choices out there today. There is no single best solution for anything. It all depends on what your application is. And there's a number of different use cases that you need to consider. Do you need something that can also do marketing videos? Or are you just going to do volumetric measurements or mapping and surveying? Do you need 2D versus 3D models? Are you also doing inspection work? Are you doing progress images? What are the other purposes of that machine so that you can pick the right machine that can either do as many of those as possible, or maybe you need to decide that you need different machines for different tasks, because that is very often the case. So when we're looking at the different options of evaluating the hardware, how will you be using it? What are your different use cases? How are you going to collect and manage the data? That's a biggie. Who's responsible for it? You have your pilot, you have data collection people, you have analysis people. Is it all the same person, or are those different people? What are the requirements? Do you have certain camera specs that you need? I mean, we're going to talk about cameras from 12 megapixels to 20 plus megapixels today. So what level of camera spec do you need? Do you need to have thermal? That's a biggie. Some people do, some people will never need thermal. Are there special payloads? And by that I mean specialty items like LiDAR. That would be a good case for what I would call special payload. While LiDAR isn't as popular as photogrammetry, mostly because of the cost, it's still, it's a growing field.
Almost certainly, and the abilities of LiDAR aren't overshadowed by what you can do with photogrammetry. They complement each other. You can get good information for below canopies and things that you don't necessarily get from the photogrammetry approach. So both tools are definitely applicable in many instances.
Yeah, and do you need to integrate with other systems? Like by that I mean, do you need to create a 3D model that you can then take into a CAD program? If you're doing a housing tract or an office building, do you need to be able to integrate the data from one to another so that they can work properly, and you can just, strip out the trees and put in a building, and is everything going to work together? So it's important to know what software you may need in order to do that integration. From a cost point of view, there's going to be an equipment cost here, there's no doubt. And if you need a certain level of hardware, then you really shouldn't skimp on that, because you're just going to be cutting down on your capabilities and functionality. So while that may sound like a total sales pitch, it's not. And those of you who know us know that we don't try and sell just to put money in our pocket. Our goal here at Multicopter Warehouse is to make sure that you are getting the right equipment for your use cases. We're not going to oversell you on stuff simply because we're going to make more money. That's not the way we want. We want you to go out, be successful, do the jobs, make money, and then come back and buy more from us. So, but we want you to be successful, but we don't want you to overspend on something that you're not going to use. Of course, like with any commercial operation, you need to be aware of insurance. Do you need training? And there's hardware training, there's software training, there's integration training, there's all kinds of different things that you may need to get up to speed. Having Aaron on board, we will be doing Pix4D training, and that's going to cover a variety of different things, from your basics to more as advanced as they want to get, right?
Yeah, we can do all kinds of things, night scenes, indoor scenes, really, and you're only limited by your imagination of what kind of projects you can do with photogrammetry.
Now, are there Pix4D certifications available for an end user?
There is a Pix4D certification. It's called Pix4D Essentials Certification, and that's something that's done online. And it just is, having gone through a previous Pix4D training can certainly be helpful, but having just general understanding of how to operate within the software, how to mark ground control points, and how to process a project is all information that you can learn through the various help resources that are available for Pix4D online, and then you can go ahead and get that certification to show that you have good competence with the software.
So if I remember right, we will be probably offering training to get somebody to be able to pass that certification.
Oh, certainly, yeah. We can help people get past that certification. We can help people exceed that certification as far as doing very advanced projects with aerial and terrestrial photogrammetry mixed together and merged together, and doing really wonderful high-resolution outputs.
Excellent, excellent. I'm looking forward to all this. I'm looking forward to taking some of his classes myself, because I am not an expert on mapping by any stretch of the imagination. So let's talk about some different products. I was going to actually have a slide in here about the MAVIC 2 Pro and the MAVIC 2 Zoom, but I opted not to do the Zoom because it really is not that good of a machine for this. It's a 12 megapixel sensor with a pretty wide angle. It's only a 1/2 size sensor. It's just, I wouldn't really call that a good machine for mapping.
Yeah, it can be helpful for an inspection when you need to be able to get a little bit closer to an object, if you will, from a distance so you can see something. But for the most part, having a variable focal length doesn't work well with photogrammetry processing. And so having a fixed focal length, such as the one that's available with the MAVIC 2 Pro or some of the other drones we'll be speaking about today, really will have a positive impact on the quality of your output at the end.
Now, a MAVIC 2 Pro, having a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, does generate good quality images. And you've got a fairly low cost machine that's got really good flight time, high quality camera, and it is a multi-use machine. I mean, it's a great photo machine. It's a great video machine. I'm not going to say it's a great mapping machine, but it's a reasonable mapping machine.
I'd say it's a great one to, like, if you're just starting off. And the applications for the MAVIC 2 Pro are quite wide. You can do a lot of different things with it. And so while it's not the best mapping machine, it certainly will get your foot in the door and give some workable products.
The downside to the MAVIC 2 Pro is that it has an electronic shutter. So that means without a mechanical shutter, it's subject to what we call rolling shutter effect, which can create distortion in the images and degrade the overall quality of the map. And sometimes you can get around that as long as it's nice and bright out, and maybe bump the ISO up just a little bit so that the shutter speed is as fast as possible. If you have a slower shutter speed while it's flying in motion, now you may also introduce motion blur.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to avoid those, there's some tweaks that you can do, but the conditions for doing the mapping mission really need to be ideal for this particular machine.
Certainly, yeah. With the linear rolling shutter distortion, for the best quality output, you really want to almost have the drone stop at each photo location to avoid that linear rolling shutter distortion effect, because when the drone is stationary during the photo process, that really negates that linear rolling shutter distortion. Even though you may not be able to see the amount of distortion with your human eye, it will have an impact on the final resolution and sort of the quality and accuracy of your end product. So when you're looking for the best quality end product, having a mechanical shutter would be preferred.
JD is asking if you can swap out a MAVIC 2 Pro sensor on his MAVIC 2 Zoom. And the short answer is yes, you can. And I do believe we may have those in stock at the moment to be able to do that. I'd have to double check. And don't ask me the cost. That's a service part, so I'd have to get you information on that. You can email us. Use the email on the bottom of the slide there, enterprise@multicopterwarehouse.com. I will say this is a one-time swap. The connectors for the camera are only rated for 12 insertions. So it is not a go back and forth as you choose. I consider it to be a one-time camera swap, and that's pretty much it. So just be advised on that. Mark is asking, can we put more information on the training on the website? Well, yes, we just don't have it yet. So we will be announcing all this stuff very, very soon. Some of the webinars that we will have coming up will be around mapping to help get you guys up to speed as quickly as possible on stuff. But yeah, all this will be available as soon as possible. You'll all get emailed about it. So don't worry, I'm on it. Just give me a little bit of time. Okay, the next item up for bid would be the Phantom 4 Pro. And this has been the go-to machine for a long time.
Mine as well. I used to use an Inspire 1, and once the Phantom 4 Pro came out, I've not flown the Inspire 1 at all, and just the camera quality on it can't be beat by other available offerings currently.
The MAVIC 2 Pro and the Phantom 4 Pro basically have the same sensor. They're both 20 megapixel, the same color profiles. They're virtually identical. The difference being the Phantom 4 Pro has that mechanical shutter, so making it much better suited for mapping missions.
Most certainly, yeah.
And now the downside to the Phantom 4 Pro, which is also the same on the MAVIC 2 Pro, I just didn't mention it, is that it doesn't have RTK ability. And we will get into what that means when we get into the RTK products. But RTK is it's real-time kinetic, which blah, 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 words, right? But it basically is a high accuracy positioning and can give you better accuracy, not only in the accuracy of the map, but the absolute positioning of where that map is in real space, like on the planet, where is it, versus relative positioning, which is going to give you a good map, just not necessarily exactly where it sits on the planet.
Yeah, those coordinates could have a shift in maybe 10 to 20 meters or 5 to 10 meters northeast, southwest, but you'll still get good relative accuracies as far as measuring a known distance within the the model with a non-RTK drone, you'll still get a good quality output. It saves you time by having the RTK ability, by not having to put out as many ground control points, and ultimately will reduce the amount of work you have to do in the field to get that accuracy.
If you really need to deal with accuracy when it comes to like property lines, you need that to be as accurate as possible where those property lines are. You're going to want to go RTK, right?
Most certainly, and when you say property lines, that sets off an alarm bell in my mind that if you're starting to deal with legal matters, it is always best to consult with a licensed surveyor for those purposes. But for non-legal binding mapping purposes, yeah, having an RTK drone will allow a non-surveyor to get that high level of accuracy.
Excellent. Is there any difference between the Phantom 4 Pro and the Phantom 4 Pro V2 as far as the sensor? No. The only difference is it went from Lightbridge to OcuSync. That is the only difference.
Well, I think when mine came with some slightly fancier props that were a little quieter.
Well, that's right.
A slightly better battery.
The batteries were the same. They all went to the high capacity battery. The Phantom 4 Pro V2 did come with their quote unquote low noise props, which you can actually see in this picture here. They have the little hook on the end. I wasn't a big fan of those. We're at altitude. We're at almost 6,000 feet above sea level here, and I just didn't think those props performed as well as the regular props. Other people disagree, whatever, but yeah, it was the props and OcuSync. So the next step up from the Phantom 4 Pro is the Phantom 4 RTK. Now, there are a few differences here in the aircraft. The camera is essentially the same. It's identical camera. However, DJI during the manufacturing process maps all the defects in the lens, and that is cooked into the firmware of the camera. So when it's doing its lens distortion corrections, it can take into account any defects in the lens, giving you a better quality final image, right? And then the little yogurt cup on the top is the RTK antenna, which will communicate back to a base station, providing a high level of accuracy, which is about a 5 centimeter resolution when doing 3D maps. So it's a big improvement in quality. Okay, James, you use a GNO. Okay, so I'll get to your question in just a second. So some of the pros are, it has good flight time, it's got the 20 megapixel camera, it's got the mechanical shutter, and it is a fairly reasonable price for what it is. We are talking close to $9,000 for a complete setup with extra batteries, travel case, landing pads, all the accessories that you would need. You're going to be close to $9,000 if you get it with the RTK base station. But I'll get into some other options here in just a moment. The downside is it has that built-in Crystal Sky display, so you can't run third-party apps. So all your mapping missions are going to be designed in the ground station app that's built into the controller, which isn't bad. I mean, it does a pretty good job.
Yeah, and typically we would recommend, previously folks used the Pix4D capture application, but my experiences with the Pilot app on the RTK setup is it works very well for automating the grid and double grid type flight patterns.
So let's talk about the RTK side of things for just a minute, right? In here, I say it works with the DRTK2 base station, so that's the DJI base station, and it can work with any base station or positioning network that is Ntrep compatible. So with Trimble, their networks are called Trimble VRS or TopCon TopNet. It can work with a number of different base stations, such as the Trimble R10 or the TopNet Hyper GS. Oh my God, I hope I got that right. So if the base station that you have has Wi-Fi ability so that it can act as an Ntrep server, then that base station will work with the Phantom 4 RTK. I think I got that right.
I think so.
Okay. So James, you're asking, can you use a GNSS base and a rover with the Phantom 4 Pro to get accuracy? And that's a two-pronged answer. On one hand, yes, if it is NTRIP compatible, you can directly connect to it, or the other side would be in a PPK workflow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely possible to post-process any GPS data you've collected on your ground control points, making that high-resolution accuracy kind of output from the differential correction. And then when you mark those points within the Pix4D software, your end output will be just as good or the same level of accuracy as you would get through the RTK setup. The only difference is you have to have somebody out in the field collecting some of those points. But in the long run, even with an RTK setup, it's good to have a couple of ground control points that you can use as checkpoints, just as validation, and make sure everything in the system is right. So even with RTK, you don't get completely away from needing to do ground control points at all.
So this is a good question from Miguel. Can you explain very quickly how are the 3D dimensions determined from the images?
Well, okay. That's not necessarily a quick answer, but the way the software works is it goes through and it looks at each image at a pixel by pixel basis, looking for unique colors and textures, if you will, within the image. And then it'll go through and it starts looking at all the different images and trying to match up those key points, if you will, those unique colors and textures. And when a key point matches, it becomes a tie point because you've now located it in two separate images. And the software is able to do all that math I struggled with back in high school, where if you can figure out two sides of a triangle, you can figure out all the sides of a triangle. So really, and it's using really just parallax, just the same kind of techniques that have been used for photogrammetry for forever, really, if you will. It's just now being done in an automated manner that there's computer vision that's able to do what the human operator used to do at a much lower scale and lower resolution previously.
And in order to get dimensions, height, width, distance, and all that, the aircraft knows what its altitude is, what its camera angle is, and so based on that, it can determine what the size of something is. So as Aaron said, if you know two of the angles, you can figure out the third angle. Well, you know the altitude and the angle of the camera, so determining the third dimension, not that big of a deal when it comes to your basic trigonometry.
Yeah, and the big thing you come down to is what is your 0 point. Most people are familiar with working with mean sea level elevations or things based off of sea level, whereas the data you get from a standard consumer grade GPS will be based off of what's called an ellipsoid or a mathematical model of the Earth. And there's a variance between the geoid and ellipsoidal heights all around, and that can lead to some variance. That's why it's important to use ground control points to have that true mean sea level or orthometric height for your end product.
Okay. Good. So I hope that helped explain that. JD is asking, will the P4 RTK work with the DataLink Pro 900? No. The DataLink Pro was a proprietary connection between the base station and the air side. It was not an NTRIP server. So the only ones from DJI that work are the DRTK2. Julie's asking, are you sure that we can link another base to the P4 RTK? I thought it was impossible. That is not true. It is possible, so long as the base station can act as an NTRIP server. That is the key. It's got to be able to act as an NTRIP server. Can you do that with only one camera? I thought you needed two at different angles. Well, you're getting different angles because the position of the aircraft changes.
Yeah, but ultimately you can't make a measurement from one single photograph. You have to have a series of overlapping photographs that have a high degree of repetitiveness within them, and that's how we're able to do those kinds of parallax kind of calculations.
All right, Harrison, back to your question you asked earlier, but I didn't get to because this is relevant now. Has the DJI DRTK2 been updated to function as a standalone GPS for getting coordinates of checkpoints and GCPs? Yes. Okay, moving on. So there's actually a couple issues to be aware of with the DRTK2 firmware. That yes, it can act as a rover now, so you can use it for that purpose. And in essence, there was like three, I'm going to call them models of the DRTK2. It's the same hardware, but they shipped with different firmware. There was the P4 version, a standalone version, and the M210 version, or the M210 RTK V2 version, I should say, and those all shipped with different firmware. Well, if you had a 210 RTK V2 one or or you bought it standalone, those can actually be upgraded to work with the MATRICE 300. But if you have a Phantom 4 RTK DRTK2, then you have to wait a couple of weeks, and then that one also will be able to be upgraded to work with the 300.
That's a lot to keep track of.
That is a lot to keep track of. Is the P4 RTK SDK remote controller still available? Ugh, that's a tough one. In order to buy the SDK remote controller, you need to register with DJI as a developer. So it's actually not a controller that enterprise dealers are supposed to sell to end users. It is for DJI to sell to developers. Now, yes, that does make it easier to use third-party software like, I don't know, Pix 4D Capture, but it's not supposed to be used that way. DJI doesn't like selling it. Ground control options. How do you get them?
I think we have some great ones here made by the Hoodman folks here at Multicopter Warehouse. There's nice big orange that can also double as a landing pad in emergency.
Right. So let's talk about that for just a moment. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I wasn't really the purpose of this, but there's basically two types of ground control points. There's dumb and there's active, right? Like the arrow points.
Yeah, the propeller arrow points have a GPS essentially built into each specific target. When you lay that target down on the ground, it starts collecting data. When the mission's over, you go back and you pick up the target and you correct the data from that target, and you have your answer.
Right. Versus a dumb one, which is just a target, and I mean, it can be paper, it doesn't matter, as long as you can get a center point on it and be able to get an accurate GPS location on it.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that the ground control targets that you're using are about 10 times what you expect your ground sampling distance to be for your project. So you want to avoid using very small targets on projects that will have a larger GSD just because it'll be harder to really pinpoint the exact spot where you were collecting the data from.
Okay. John, I hope that answered your question. So we'll move, keep them coming. These have been some really good questions so far. So the next kind of product in the series would be the MATRICE 200 version 2 series of products. And there was three. There's the MATRICE 200, the MATRICE 210, and the MATRICE 210 RTK. So those can use several different cameras, including the X5S, the X7, and the XT2, and if you can find one, an X4S, which was a great camera for mapping because it had a mechanical shutter, but that camera was for some reason discontinued a while back. The MATRICE 210 RTK, very similar to the P4 RTK in that it can use the DRTK2 base station and is in-trip compatible. So MATRICE 200s are a fantastic machine. They've been out for a few years now. They're used for mapping, surveying, measurements, photos, videos. I mean, pretty much you name it. It is a really good go-to platform. On the pros of it, there's multiple camera options for it. Not only the DJI products, the X5S, X7, XT2, there's slant range, has a multi-spec sensor for it. There's spotlights, there's megaphones, there's gas samplers. We have the U10 methane detector. Please buy those because they're good money for us. Little sales pitch there. There's multiple models to choose from in the 200 series based on your needs. They're adverse weather capable, so they can fly in a light rain or mist. And then you have the 210, which has the RTK antennas on it, which you can see in this picture here. The downside is the cost. I mean, you're starting to get into the $10,000 range just for the aircraft, and the flight times loaded up with payloads, you're in about the 20-minute range. So wasn't huge flight times, but it's a very, very, very capable platform.
One other great feature of the M200 series, if I'm not mistaken, is there's a top mount camera as well, which really opens up the ability to do inspections under bridges and things like that, where you can get the camera pointed up at angles that many UAVs just can't achieve with a bottom mount camera.
Because they'd be looking through the props or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have that type of work, I never think about that. No one ever asks me about it, but there are those use cases where having the camera unobstructed by the props could be a biggie. Did DJI ever come out with a successor to the X4S? No. Simple answer. No, there is not. I guess there's two ways of looking at it. There is no successor to the X4S. However, the X7 with the right, I can't remember which lens it is, I think it's the 24 millimeter lens, does give you a mechanical shutter. So if you want high quality, good resolution images, the X7 with the 24 mil lens is a great option. It's just an expensive option. Mm-hmm. You're going from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars. It's a big, big step up. What is the payload for this? I'm not quite sure what the question is, what you're asking for. For inspections under bridges, would you lose GPS? What challenges are there to operating the M200 without GPS? Well, if you lose GPS, you may lose your positioning ability. But that's when you may get into the 210 RTK, which can provide some solution around that. But it's one of the challenges. If you don't have GPS, you may be flying in ADI mode.
Yeah, but still the position hold capabilities of these higher end aircraft are much better than the toy ones that will drift away with the wind quite quickly. The position hold, because of other visible sensors, I think keep these pretty solid even when operating in those GPS, I don't want to say denied, but difficult environments.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to fly under a bridge to do an inspection at night when it can't see the ground.
Yeah.
So that would be a biggie for that. Okay. How many pounds in additional equipment and sensors could be added to the M200? That is 4 pounds. Not in addition to the cameras that are on there. That is total payload from a naked machine is 4 pound capacity. So however that works out. For those of us with an older Inspire 1 with the Zenmuse X5, how does that camera compare to the Phantom 4 Pro for mapping? Well, the X5 did not have a mechanical shutter.
Yeah, it still had that linear rolling shutter, which was disappointing, but it does have a fairly good resolution. I think that was a 24 megapixel.
Well, no, right, the X5 was 16.
Oh, 16, a little bit lower, okay.
Right, but it had the larger sensor.
Yeah.
So it's a micro four thirds sensor versus a 1-inch sensor.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a significantly bigger sensor, which is always good, for sure. Has DJI come up with high altitude props for the 210? No, they say they're not necessary. I have flown the 210 at 14,000 feet with no issue, lost a little bit of flight time, but there was no need for high altitude props, although they are coming out with high altitude props for the 300. Okay, I think we're caught up on questions there. So let's talk about the newest and the greatest, the MATRICE 300 RTK. This is a beast of a machine. If you guys are here in Colorado, come into the store, DJI Colorado here in Centennial, and take a look. I've got one on display. This thing is a monster. It's, even though, when you see pictures of it, it looks like it's the same as the 210, but it's a much bigger size. It's not double the size, but it's beefier.
It's definitely an impressive machine to look at and fly.
Again, like the 200 series, because it's just an improvement over the 200, you can use this for pretty much any purpose out there. I'm just not going to say it's a good cinematography platform because of it doesn't have a camera with interchangeable lenses and things. The X7 does not work on this, and I'll explain that in a moment. Some of the pros on it, excellent flight times with something like what you see here with the H20 camera on it. You're going to get upwards of 40 minutes of flight time on this bird, which can be almost double of what you would get with the 200 series. It has RTK ability built in to the aircraft, so it's pretty much ready to go with either the DRTK2 base station or an NTRIP compatible system. The cons, though, today is there's very limited camera options available. You have the X4S, which or you cannot use the X4S, X5S, or X7 because there's no image processor on the aircraft. So where the 210 had an image processor and an SD card built into the aircraft to save the images, the 300 requires that the camera has its own image processor and SD card. So that wipes out the X4S, X5S, and X7. So you cannot, via firmware, add an SD card slot. So you can't add hardware with firmware. So those cameras are out, and there's no way to add them. So today, it's limited to the H20, the H20T, which has the thermal, the XT2, and the Z30, and there'll be some more options coming out down the road. So in terms of saying whether this is a good photogrammetry camera today, I think, Aaron, you're probably in agreement with me that because it's using the wide angle camera, which is only 12 megapixels and a 1/2 sensor, it really isn't the best platform.
Yeah, and the design of the platform itself with the downward facing motors helps make it advantageous for those tight inspection areas where you might have things overhead you might be potentially bumping into, such as that bridge inspection. But right now, yeah, the camera options are somewhat limited and are not really as ideal. And with the cost for the batteries per flight, really the Phantom 4 line offers a much better return on investment or bang for your buck per flight for photogrammetry. Today, yes.
Yeah. So if you see there on the notes there, I say that an oblique camera is coming in Q4. That is what we're being told right now. It may be sooner, maybe later. It's DJI, so take that with a grain of salt. But what is an oblique camera? So an oblique camera, if you look at the design, I probably should have had a slide in here for that, but I don't know exactly what theirs is going to look like. But think of one camera that's facing straight down, and then 4 cameras that are angled from 4 sides. So in essence, if these are all, say, 20 megapixel cameras, what you end up with is a 100 megapixel image that has different angles all at the same time. Now, it's probably going to save it as 5 different image files, but equivalency-wise, in one shot, you're taking a 100 megapixel shot at a time. So, and because you're taking it from 5 different angles, you're saving on flight time. You're not having to do dual grid passes, maybe not even having to do an oblique circle around it. So what do you think that's going to actually do in terms of mapping speed and efficiency?
Well, I think that'll have a big impact on the number of flight lines, because you'll be able to get those left and right oblique views during the same pass, if you will. So very similar to what the some fixed wing platforms have with shifting or rotating cameras, if you will, or oscillating. And I think it'll really open up and allow you to capture an immense amount of data very quickly with this hardware in the future.
So we don't have dates, we don't have prices, we don't have specs. I just have a vague date that this is going to be in Q4. So please do not hit me with all of those questions. I don't have the answers today. JD's asking, can you trade up from a 210 with a base station? Right now, we're not doing a trade-in program. It's something that we are looking at offering, but today I don't have a trade-up program. But hit me up soon. I mean, we are having internal discussions about whether we should do that or not. I know you think we should do it because I just mentioned it, but whether it makes good business sense. Thoughts and recommendations on handling mapping vertical facades such as cliffs and buildings?
Oh, I have a great tip for this one. The Pix4D Capture application, which is a free application that you can download for either an iOS or Android device, has a free flight mode that allows you to set a vertical or horizontal offset that whenever the drone moves up or horizontally a certain number of feet, I think the lowest number is 3 feet and it can go up as high as 60 feet, the drone will snap a photo. So essentially all you need to do is to do a vertical facade, use that free flight mode, have the drone just go up in a straight line, then have it sort of move to the right or left, and then drop it straight down, and just kind of fly what we'll call a vertical grid.
So is that a manual flight or is that an automated flight?
The free flight is a manual flight, so the pilot would be in command of the drone the whole time. Due to the proximity to things such as building facades or maybe low overhead wires, etc., it's not really safe to try to automate that type of a flight, but they do have a flight mode built into the free Pix4D Capture app that really helps facilitate this vertical grid type approach pretty easily.
Sounds like something you should do a webinar on.
We can work on that, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we have talked a lot about Pix4D, and to be fair, it's the software I'm most familiar with, and you're definitely familiar with it.
I was a customer before I was an employee, and I'm still a big fan.
So there are other products out there, Maps Made Easy, which I've used many times. TraceAir, which is new, it's really focused on the construction industry. ArcGIS is another one. Drone Deploy, very popular. Now, the only two that I want to mention here are going to be Pix4D and Maps Made Easy because they're the ones I'm most familiar with. And really, the major difference in these is the cost structure, the price structure on them. Pix4D is a license. You get it for either a month or a year or lifetime, basically. And that can be fairly expensive for someone starting off. Right?
It can. There is a learning curve because you do all the processing locally. It's not sort of a cloud-based black box solution. But Pix4D is certainly a very powerful option that gives you, I believe, top quality results.
Now, Maps Made Easy, on the other hand, is their pricing is based on blocks of size. So think of it as like buying per acre. Now, in terms of cost, my personal experience with this is I had to do a 42-acre crime scene for the sheriff's department. And that 42-acre map cost me $16. So now, how often do I go out and do maps? I may have a need to do it myself personally twice a year, maybe. So why would I spend $350 a month or $4,000 for a lifetime Pix4D if I'm only going to do a map on an extremely rare situation? In which case, something like Maps Made Easy may be a good choice for the back-end processing. But there is a point of diminishing returns on that, and once you do enough of them, now it becomes more cost-effective to go with Pix4D. So getting started, learning, and getting an understanding of the basics, Maps Made Easy may be a good choice, but as you progress, you'll see that Pix4D becomes more cost-effective as you do more and more and more. Now, the other thing that we can offer you here is a 30-day trial license for Pix4D. So if you're interested in that, you want to try it out, see what it's like, email us at enterprise@multicopterwarehouse.com, which you have seen on every single slide, and we'll hook you up with a trial license. So should be pretty cool. Let's see.
And a great thing about that trial license is that you're not limited on the outputs that you can create from the software. You have full access to the capabilities to implement ground control points, to output 3D point clouds, etc. There's no limits on that trial license.
Robert's asking about, what about HiveMapper? I have no experience with HiveMapper.
Yeah, the word HiveMapper, I'm afraid I'm ignorant on that one as well.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
They keep coming out new ones all the time, but I'll check into that one more so I'm aware of it for future webinars.
Now, Pix4D, there's actually two different ways of doing the processing. You can do it in their cloud, or you can do it on the desktop app, which does require Windows, a little caveat there. But this is not going to be a tutorial on how to use Pix4D. Just so you understand, I'm going to give you the absolute quickest frickin' rundown you've ever seen on how to actually use it. You're going to use either an iOS or Android device. You run the app. You can select different mission types from a polygon, a grid for 2D maps, a double grid for 3D models, or a circular, which is also good for certain types of 3D models, and then that free flight mode that Aaron mentioned. And typically I'm doing a 3D model, I do a double grid, and then maybe even add a circular if need be for additional quality of it. So once you do that, you basically connect to your machine, and boom, it goes and does all the work for you, collects all the images. That was the circular, so I talked about that for extra data. Take all the images. Now, this is how you do it with the cloud version. You log into the website, you start a new project, start uploading the images. Or you process them with the desktop app, which does have a little bit more of a learning curve.
Most certainly, but it allows you to really customize the project to make sure you're getting out the results and the outputs that you're really looking for.
If you have used Pix4D in the cloud before, there was an update that just came out a couple of days ago. And what I know, one of the features is the auto GCP mode, but is there some other stuff that are kind of cool?
Pix4D did just announce the ability to do automatic GCP detection, and that's only available on the cloud platform. And then they have recently revised their cloud offering. They used to have an offering called Pix4D Cloud, and now they have Standard and Advanced. The new advanced version of the cloud essentially has the same offerings as what the BIM, or the Building Information Modeling, Pix4D BIM offered before. There's a timeline component if you're doing like a construction site you're doing the same thing on a weekly basis, allows you to set up a timeline so you can see the progression of that project. But otherwise, the processing algorithms behind both versions are the same.
Okay, excellent. GCP stands for Ground Control Point. So that's a target that you put on the ground that helps the software analyze the scene better. Mm-hmm. That's probably the shortest way of putting that.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
Brad's asking, how does Drone Deploy measure up to Pix4D and Maps Made Easy? I don't have
really. They're all very somewhat similar. Having previously been an employee of Pix4D, I'm somewhat biased towards their platform. But some of the variances is the Drone Deploy platform, I believe, is only cloud-based at this time. So
same with Maps Made Easy.
A lot of folks are not comfortable loading their data up to the cloud. A lot of times law enforcement agencies who are doing accident scene investigation, things like that, that's not something to have out on a cloud site. But overall, the quality of the outputs are very similar, and they are using similar structure from motion algorithms. And so you'll get very similar outputs, but you may find that there's a lot of, I would say, black boxness to the Drone Deploy, where the data is submitted and you get back results, and you as a user don't have as much interaction or interactivity with that to get just the product output you're looking for.
All right. So, like I said, this was just kind of a quick and dirty on how to use the cloud one. So you upload your images, you wait until you get an email that says it's all ready, and then you can open that up and view the results. These are 2D results here, so you can see it kind of overlaid on top of what would be Google Maps satellite view. And we can see the textured mesh, we can see a point cloud, we can do measurements in here. There's tools on the upper right-hand corner to do line measurements, square footage, volumetric measurements, and things of that nature. Or you can also view it in 3D and spin it around, and that's where you can do some 3D or like volumetrics. I can actually measure 3 sides and actually come up with the volume of that building, which is kind of cool. And again, you can select just a textured mesh or point clouds, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And the measurement tools are right in here. So
one of my favorite aspects of the cloud interface is really it allows you to share your product or your outputs with other users who may not have a high-end workstation or a computer that could run Pix4D. So you can share a link out for people who don't have a Pix4D account to really anyone. They can follow that link and access the material and even do measurements and volume calculations directly in the software themselves without even going back to the original pilot who.
Oh, excellent point. Being able to share that and have other people be able to do measurements and things. Do you guys want to see a live demo of the portal there and actually see me playing around with one of the maps? Okay then. Sure. Let me bring that up here somewhere. I got to bring up a browser here. Okay. Let me make sure you guys can see that. Okay, so here's a couple different projects that I've done. You can see I've done one on an Evo 8K, the H20, some different options here. I'm just going to select this office one. This was the very, very first test we did with the H20 on the M300, and it will show that we have some fine tuning to do of the parameters to get exactly what we want out of it. And this is a 2D view, and here we can zoom in very tight so you can see this awesome Jeep that I have. Very cool. Let's see what's the distance between these. Right there. can bring up a little measurement tool, about 8.5 feet between those. Let me do that again here. There we go. So I can keep doing, put all kinds of measurements on here. What else is interesting on here? Add markers.
Yeah, you can leave annotation points essentially, so you could share this product or this link with another user, and they could go in and make annotations such as telling somebody that they needed to go up and provide maintenance to one of the areas on the roof.
Yeah, it's like dropping a pin.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
And you can leave some attributes there, and then also ultimately export that data out as what's called a GeoJSON, which would be a geospatial type of file that you can use in a GIS system if you want to use that point in other maps later.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll click on 3D, and it'll take just a moment to load up the 3D map. And ooh, magic! That's awesome.
And you may notice that there's some distortion, that the edge of the buildings here don't look as sharp and crisp as we might wish them to be. And I believe that's an artifact that when this mission was flown, the camera was kept at what we'll call a nadir, or straight down orientation. So we didn't really get any good oblique angles or looks, if you will, at the side of the building. We'll be providing a second edition or a second copy of this model shortly that has better oblique imagery that really captures the true look of the multi-copter warehouse facility.
So this was me doing this, not knowing what I'm doing, versus Aaron doing it, who knows what he's doing. So that's the big difference there.
But you get really great results, even with the nadir data for straight down for a topographic map. Very straightforward and top quality result for someone never having used the software before.
Yeah, I mean, the software is easy to use. So have either of you used Drone Harmony mapping app for flight planning or execution?
Oh, that's a very powerful flight planning application. I have some experience with it, yeah, and it works great for vertical inspections of vertical objects. Pix4D just released a new product called Pix4D Scan that's very similar to it. But yeah, the Drone Harmony is a powerful flight planning application.
Okay. Does the full monthly and annual subscription come with the ability to use the cloud as well? Yes, it is both the desktop and the cloud. So you can use either one or both.
There is a budget, if you will, or a limit on the amount of cloud processing. With a monthly rental or lease of the software, I believe you get to do 2,000 images a month. And then if you have an annual license, or I'm sorry, 2,400, I think roughly, or around in that range. And then an annual license is about 30,000 images. So if you have an annual license, you could do a whole lot of processing in 1 month, or you could go about acquiring additional cloud credits.
And now the other thing you can do is you can do your processing with the desktop app, upload that data as a project to the cloud, so that you've had more control over the processing on the desktop, but then being able to put it in the cloud for other people to access.
Yeah, certainly you can do that, or you can even start the project on the cloud or on the desktop, upload it to the cloud, have it processed there, and then download it. But whenever you're doing the processing on the cloud, Pix4D is billed by Amazon Web Services for that processing. So you are able to do unlimited processing via a desktop application and then upload projects to the cloud for sharing, and that can be done more affordably, if you will, than
because it's not using CPU cycles to process the data.
Exactly.
What type of specs on the Windows machine is required for the Pix4D local processing? Well, I have run it on a very, very low-end machine, and it will take a long-ass time. So what would you recommend as a system?
Overall, the Pix4D software has been very stable. The newest version of it, the new 4.5.6, does run substantially faster than older versions. But really, when it comes to setting up a hardware or a computer for local processing, you want to have as high end of a processor, multi-thread as possible, and then also as much RAM, really. And typically, with at least 32 gigabytes of RAM, doing projects up to a couple thousand images isn't a problem. If you're going to be doing more than 30 or more than a couple of thousand images, certainly consider trying to get 64 or maybe even 128 gigs of RAM. And having also then a graphics processor or GPU can be very beneficial for some of the processing steps. And typically they found that the GeForce line of cards from NVIDIA seem to be the most efficient with the Pix4D algorithm. There's some other lines of cards that aren't quite as good, but the GeForce has always been best. But typically, you really only need one GPU. Pix4D isn't set up to leverage multiple GPUs, so you don't need to spend money buying a system with multiple ones for Pix4D's purposes. But try to get as much RAM as you can, have a solid state drive if you're going to be doing a lot of processing, and at least an i7 or an i9 multi-thread processor.
Okay. In essence, a good gaming machine.
Yeah, and good gaming. Yeah, and that can be somewhat hard to justify on expense reports for some groups. But yeah, really having a gaming machine is a good option. And the folks at Pix4D often recommend that you check with a group called Puget Systems out of the Pacific Northwest. They've done a lot of benchmark testings on different components and how they perform with Pix4D. So Puget Systems, P-U-G-E-T Systems, and they have some really good links on their website talking about benchmark testing they've done with the software.
Excellent. Okay, we'll open up for any other questions here, but thank you guys all for joining. I hope this has been informative. I really wanted to talk about the hardware, but we did get into a lot of the software processing here. But I think you really have to consider both when you're trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to do for your business, what's going to make the most sense. But this webinar was kind of born out of these questions coming up on a daily basis of what should I get to do mapping? And I hope we answered that question. Do you feel good about it, Aaron?
I think so, yeah. And back to the hardware, I try to get the best quality optics or camera possible, because the other features that you find on drones, whether it be obstacle avoidance things, don't really come into play quite as much with mapping, because typically you're up at 100 or so feet where you're not having a lot of obstacles you're running into, etc. So having the best quality camera will typically provide the best quality in maps.
Okay. Jonathan is asking, what's the largest micro SD size that can be used in the Phantom 4 Pro V2? The answer to that is 128 gig, although you would have to be doing a massive map to use that kind of data.
Yeah, in the long run, I'm not a big fan of using those really large SD cards, just because people tend to leave it in the camera, just use it after time, and I'll take my SD card out at the end of the mission and back up my data and then put in another card. So really having 4 or 5 32 gigabyte cards is, I think, a better use of money and resources than 128.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about JPEGs.
Yeah,
right?
In a typical mission of 20 minutes flying, capturing 20 megapixel images, you won't fill up a 32 gigabyte card and in one battery.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that really is a concern at all. The files are fairly small, and yeah, you can fit a ton of them on a 32 or even a 64. I don't see any reason to be putting 128s in your machine. I have a P4 Pro. Is there any benefit to buying a P4 Pro V2? Well, a backup. That's
having two is one, and one sometimes is none.
Yeah. It's kind of like what I say about backup systems for your computer. 1 is none, 2 is a copy, 3 is a backup. But the only difference is we mentioned the props, which to me is no big deal, and the transmission protocol, which went from a version of Lightbridge to a version of OcuSync, gives you more range and a better downlink. But when it comes to mapping, there is zero difference. So if I still had a P4 Pro, I would not have bothered to upgrade to a P4 Pro V2. Just wasn't enough benefit from there. Does Pix4D allow for terrain awareness to help keep the drone at a contact height?
So there's a couple different, when we say Pix4D, that's the name of a company that makes different pieces of software, and the Pix4D Mapper software is what processes the data. The Pix4D Capture application is a free application that Pix4D provides to help automate data collection, and currently the Pix4D Capture application does not include terrain following, but like the Drone Harmony application that was mentioned earlier is one that does allow for terrain following. So it's not critical that you have terrain following for the best quality or for your output to work, but it can be helpful maintaining that consistent offset from the ground.
Well, I think we should mention, you do not have to use a specific capture app to work with a specific processing app. So you can use Pix4D Capture. It's free. It's available on iOS or Android. But there's Maps Made Easy has one called Map Pilot. Mm-hmm. I've used that many times. In fact, I used to use that with Pix4D because back in the day, it was the only one that had battery management. Otherwise, you had to pause the mission, fly it back, land, switch batteries, and Map Pilot would just say, hey, it's time to switch batteries. You switch a battery, it says, do you want to resume? So it was the first to do that. Now all of them do that.
Yeah.
GS Pro from DJI, it's a great product for setting up mapping missions. Or even the Pilot app that is built into the, which comes for the enterprise versions of the products. If you're using an Autel, they have a mission planning app. So you don't have to use a specific planning app to work with, say, Pix4D as the backend processor. You can even fly it manually.
Yes, you can. And manually is how I kind of learned how to do it previously when I first started off using the rule of thirds grid to make sure I achieved sufficient overlap. But yeah, as long as you have good quality images with good quality overlap, Pix4D or the other map processing software we talked about today will certainly be able to come up with an end product for you.
Okay. Good question, JD. You're asking, do I have a preference on the brand name of an SD card for mapping? And I don't think I need to recommend a specific brand, but I do want to say you want a card that has a V30 rating or better. The V30 rating is how fast it can transfer data back and forth, and you just want the fastest you can get because you want to save the images faster. You don't want to risk a dropped frame or anything like that. You want it to save as quickly as possible to the drive. So card that has a V30 rating. I personally have a lot of Hoodman cards because they were good and they were affordable. I use SanDisk Extreme Pro cards because they're extremely good. But I also have some other brands that I've tested and found that they were good. The key is that V30 rating. I think that's the biggest one to look for. Class 10 is outdated. U3 is outdated. V30 is the spec to look for. John, and this is a great question, not entirely relevant to this, but I'll answer it anyway. Is there a workaround working with government requirements of a U.S. drone? Can you turn off part of this system the government is worried about spying from China? So I'm going to answer this two different ways. One is no, because China is not spying on any of our data. They don't have access to any of our data. There's nothing to turn off to prevent them from getting access to the data. It has been proven over and over and over again by cybersecurity firms that they are not collecting any data, they're not looking at any data, no data is being transmitted to them, with one exception. If you are in your flight logs and you click on the sync icon, you are acknowledging that you want to send that information to them. That data is encrypted, and if you're in the US, it is stored on Amazon Web Services servers that are not in China. Now, whether they have access to them or not is debatable, but whatever. So long as you do not click that sync to the cloud icon, you are not giving them any data. So there's that, okay? On the DJI Pilot app, if you're using systems that use the Pilot app, there is a function in there called local data mode, which basically shuts off all internet access. So you don't have maps, you don't have flight logs that can be synced and things like that. And then there's, on certain products, there's a government edition, which basically means it has local data mode turned on and there's no way to turn it off. So hope that answered the question in a briefly as possible.
Lots of questions coming in.
Some SD card prices range from $40 to $80. You know what? A 32 gig V30 card should cost about $20. That's really the bottom line. They're running about $20 right now. The more expensive ones are these ruggedized or whatever. To me, they look identical. I don't know what a ruggedized micro SD card is, so I would not overspend on that. Best tablet for mapping applications? Well, kind of depends. There's great applications for Android and iOS. I think that comes down to your personal preference in which platform you like.
Yeah, I've always been an iOS fan myself. But.
Same here. And on iOS, I have Map Pilot, I have Lychee, I have Ground Station Pro, I have Pix4D Capture, and on my Android tablet, I still have an old NVIDIA K1. I have Map Pilot. I have Litchi. I have Pix4D Capture. So in terms of the tablet, I think it's more about what software do you like.
Yeah, because different third-party softwares are available on different platforms.
Any update on the Evo 2 series stock date? Hopefully next week. I have the 6K, the 8K, and the duals coming in. You will see lots of information on that from us as soon as those are available. So we'll have reviews coming up. We have all kinds of stuff on those as soon as we have an exact date. If you were starting out now with a P4 Pro, how would you start doing mapping work? Now, do you mean how to actually start doing the mapping or how to get those jobs?
That's
a
differentiation that's important.
Okay. What drone would you recommend for stockpile measurements and mining sites? P4 Pro, P4 Pro RTK, or I don't think I'd go any higher than that, would you?
No, you don't really need to. And even for some projects, you can get by with like some of the smaller drones, but you suffer some of the image quality. But depending on what level of accuracy you need, would play into that.
Yeah, but I would say if you just want to go to machining, a P4 Pro.
Yeah. Or if you can find a P4 Advanced used online, really the obstacle avoidance sensors aren't important for mapping, and you can get the P4 Advanced, the same sensor.
Yeah, that's true. How do you get mapping jobs? Learn how to do mapping first.
Well, learn a little bit about mapping. It depends on maybe who you're kind of working with. Different folks need different kind of stuff, whether it be utility organizations needing maps of their facilities, or golf courses needing maps of their information for what they call yardage books to know how far from the hole out to from the driving point. So just kind of think about the specialization, the specialty you want to go into. Maybe contact some construction firms who may be looking for updates on projects that are going on in your area, etc. But I would encourage you to become familiar with the mapping process and being able to produce a good quality output before you start approaching folks for jobs.
Let's go back to this industries slide I had, right? Do you know anybody in these industries? Pretty simple, right? Agriculture is a different beast because there's different sensors that are often used in that. The rest of them are all using basic RGB cameras for the most part. So do you know somebody who is in construction or inspection work or mining or public safety or utilities or any vertical industry that would need this type of data? And ask for work.
Yeah.
Knock on some doors. Offer to do some free stuff for experience. Get out there and do the stuff. I wanted to do a whole series of stuff on building progress shots. So I just found a local building that was under construction. I went and did it, and showed someone how I was going to do this really cool progress shot, because I did an orbit every time, like every 3 weeks, and then I just put that into a video editor. And so in the course of like 4 rotations, you see the building grow up from the ground. So kind of cool. So get out there, get experience, get out there and do it. Wouldn't recommend mapping airports.
No, definitely stay away from airports.
Airports would be bad. Yeah, let's not do that. But, go find something, open space or whatever, and understand the mapping and figure out how to get proficient at it. How does one become proficient in the mapping world? Practice, 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 right?
That's a good question, because really photogrammetry is combining, and using UAVs to map is combining a lot of areas that used to be different sciences or professional realms. Like, you need to have a little bit of understanding about how surveying works so you can collect good quality data to have good accuracy. You need to certainly be understanding of photography in general, because getting a good quality photo from your drone is paramount. Certainly during the day, when you have good lighting overhead, it's easy to take a photo with the automatic settings. But when you get into the shoulders of the day, if you will, early morning, late at night, etc., being able to take a good quality photo with your drone, or a sequence of those photos, is critical to getting a good reconstruction.
So basic photography skills on top of the mapping.
Yeah, and then also learning about what your clients or customers are ultimately looking for. A lot of times folks just need a top-down map so they know where they can do measurements. Sometimes they need a 3D model to really scope things out. So it's a tough thing to kind of dive into, but I would encourage you to research what's called GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, computer mapping, and any kind of introductory courses you can get for that to sort of learn about that area is super helpful.
Now, how to become proficient with Pix4D? Ask us for a 30-day trial license.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no cost, no obligation to you. We'll hook you up with a license key, and you're free to use it. If this is something that you want to pursue, maybe before you kick off that trial license, because as I said, it's only good for 30 days, wait, for the next couple of weeks for us to develop some new webinars and some training programs and go through that route. I'm pretty confident that what we're going to offer in free information like this is going to be better than what you're going to find in most places, and our paid programs are going to be pretty much the best out there.
We'll be able to take you from zero to hero in just a few days.
So when it comes down to the training, we should be in pretty good shape. Monthly cost of Pix4D, $350.
I believe you can get the monthly rental for $350 a month for the full Pix4D Mapper suite, or $3,500 a year, or a perpetual license for roughly $5,000.
Yeah.
And then also they have some other products that may be more attractive to you, such as Pix4D React, which is geared for public safety. That's at a much more affordable price
only
point of like
$1,000 a year,
$35 a month, $350 a year.
$350 a year. Very affordable for just 2D stuff. And then there's specialized products. There's Pix4D Survey, Pix4D Fields. There's a number of different products that are geared towards specific markets. So if you're doing mapping and surveying and you want the best there, well, Pix4D Survey. If you need agriculture work and you're going to be using multispectral cameras, you want Pix4D Fields. So there's a number of different packages. Just go to pix4d.com, look at the different options that are there, and you can see just how broad of a range this segment of the industry is. I mean, and it's pretty broad.
Mm-hmm. And continuing to grow daily.
So, I don't see any more. Okay. One more here. Do you have any experience with drone franchise? There are several that state you can get into business if you join with them. Oh, I think you may be talking about like DroneBase or droners.io, those type of services. DroneBase is the one I'm most familiar with. You sign up with them, and then they'll send you on a little training mission, typically your own house, so you understand what they're asking for in terms of a mission. And then they send out missions when they sell projects. If you're the first one to accept it, you get to go out and do the job. You upload the files, and usually within a day or two, you get paid. This is beer money work. This is not full-time work. It is not good side income work. It is literally beer money. The typical job on there pays between $40 and $70. I have done some that were, close to $200 because they were bigger commercial projects, but it's not high-paying money. However, if you get lucky, like some guys did here a couple of years ago, where this hailstorm came in through here and devastated thousands of homes, we had some guys make some pretty good coin on DroneBase for a couple of weeks. Personally, I've been a member of DroneBase for several years, and in the past year, I have seen 4 missions come through. Mm-hmm. There are way too many pilots for the amount of work that they have available, so it's typically not worth it to get involved with them anymore. For ag, does Pix4D have a preference on the sensor to be used, i.e. mica sense versus slant range? I would also throw in there the DJI Phantom 4 multispectral. That's a great camera. And essentially, these are all doing basically the same thing, right? You have an RGB camera, you have a red edge, a blue edge, and a green edge.
Yeah, for the most part, but there are some aspects that you want to take into account because typically it's good if you can get a reflectivity target or a calibration target for the ground. That way you're able to get radiometrically accurate data from one day to the next. And so without radiometric calibration, it's hard to compare data from one day to another because you have different atmospheric conditions that have to be taken into account. But really both the Slant Range and the MicaSense products, and there's also another one by Parrot called the Sequoia, which is very similar. And yeah, any three of those would be a good quality sensor to attach to your drone.
Excellent. Well, guys, we got to get going. Thanks for stopping by and spending some time with us. This did run a little bit long, so I apologize for that. We do the best we can to try and keep these to an hour, and we horribly failed on that today. We're almost at an hour and a half. So thank you guys for sticking with us. We hope this was enjoyable. We hope it was educational and informative. We try and do the best we can. If you have further questions, be sure and hit us up at enterprise@multicopterwarehouse.com or our direct enterprise line there, 303-956-4600. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, for some of you who mentioned it, we have different sales guys who handle different territories in the country. So if you just call in, we'll route you to the right one. If it's very specific PIX4D questions, you can hit Aaron A. Woods, AWOODS, at multicopterwarehouse.com. He can help you out there. We will definitely be sending out to all of you information on the training programs as those become available, as well as being on our website, on our Facebook page, all the common social media places. So look for that as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, Aaron. Had a good time on the webinar.
Super glad to be here and look forward to doing more of these and helping everybody make the best quality maps and models possible.
And special shout out to JD because he asks more questions on any webinar every single time than anybody else. So special shout out to you, JD. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will catch you guys later. Bye-bye.